Aussie, Aussie, Aussies! No more coal! Aussie, Aussie, Aussies! No more coal!
This is outside the Australian Embassy in Berlin.
The whole country is on fire, and the smoke is just...
This woman is reading a letter from her cousin, who lives in Australia's capital city, Canberra.
I'm terrified, actually. A feeling of existential terror and distress from imagining all the human pain and suffering my children will witness in their lives if we don't curb emissions as soon as possible.
Australia has a long and complicated history with bushfires. This is former Australian Conservative Prime Minister Tony Abbott fighting fires. Yep, he really is a volunteer firefighter. Back in 2013, he said,
"Look, a fire is a part of the Australian experience.
It's not the experience they put in the tourism ads, but he isn't wrong. He is wrong about this.
These fires are certainly not a function of climate change, they're just a function of life in Australia."
He's talking about Red October. By this time, people had known about the link between bushfires and climate change for at least 26 years. The country is getting hotter and droughts more severe. And if the country is hotter and drier, the bushfire seasons are going to last longer and be even harder to control. Climate change expert Ross Garnaut told the Australian government in 2008 this should be directly observable by 2020.
You have acknowledged the anger directed towards you during this bushfire crisis. You have not yet acknowledged any fault, though, on your part. Will you take this opportunity now to accept that you could have done more to heed the warnings and prepare for this?
This is the current Conservative Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, staring lovingly at a lump of coal. As record-breaking bushfires raged around the country in December 2019, Morrison leapt into action and fucked off to Hawaii for a holiday. While he was away, things got rapidly worse.
The death of 2 volunteer firefighters overnight, killed when their vehicle rolled after being struck.
For the first time, I think, people have wanted to see a more direct involvement of the federal government in responding to these national disasters.
The federal government knew this was coming.
There were many concerns that this type of fire season would have occurred last year. I remember those briefings very, very vividly.
But it seems like they did nothing to prepare.
I'm only shaking your hand if you give more funding to our RFS.
How come we only had 4 trucks to defend our town?
So let's take a look at why.
Scott Morrison. His response to these fires erupting all over Australia was to go on holiday to Hawaii. Why did he do that?
Look, firstly, one thing you have to understand about our fire regime and our firefighting regime, it is state-based.
Australia has a state and territory-based firefighting regime. The federal government contributes almost nothing to fire prevention and management, despite getting the lion's share in tax revenue.
Tell the Prime Minister to go and get from Nelligan. We really enjoy doing this, head.
Without the necessary resources, the volunteer fire services have had to resort to some desperate measures.
We're running around in private vehicles to put these fires out because there's not enough units on the ground.
Bushfire inquiries tell us that the largely volunteer-based fire agencies around Australia are under-resourced and overextended. And all of these inquiries ask that the federal government step in and do something about it before it's too late.
It's really hard to tell what everything is.
But they never really have.
We in this generation have no greater responsibility than to pass on intact to future generations Australia's priceless environment. And my government unequivocally accepts that responsibility.
This is Prime Minister Bob Hawke. Yes, the guy who broke a world record drinking a yard of beer in 11 seconds in 1955. He's about to win the 1990 election and put forward an emissions reduction target of 20% by 2005. It's a bold move that would change the course of history. Not because Australia managed to hit the target, God no. In fact, emissions from everything outside the land sector has trended up, and projections say with current policy, it'll only get worse. After Hawke won the election, Australia fell into a recession and the government's focus shifted very quickly.
Tonight, the leadership crisis in Canberra. Bob Hawke forces Paul Keating's hand for a final showdown.
I pledge to fight the battle against unemployment and for economic recovery with all of the energy I can muster.
When the Hawke government was moving towards this 20% reduction in carbon emissions, fossil fuel industry lobbyists were fighting back, rebranding fossil fuels as essential to Australia's economic prosperity.
For decades, BHP has supported community and cultural projects. To give you an idea of the size of the project, it's 3 times the size of the Snowy Mountain scheme. The high-quality coal from these mines helps make Australia the world's biggest exporter of coal. And you don't need to be a Rhodes Scholar to work out what that means to our economy.
Hawke's emissions reduction target came with a big caveat, written in at the last minute by future PM Paul Keating. It reads, "The government will not proceed with measures which have net adverse economic impacts in the absence of similar action by major greenhouse gas producing countries." In other words, Australia won't do anything to cut emissions unless it makes us money or unless the US or China do it first. This became known as the no regrets strategy. No regrets made it extremely difficult to reduce carbon emissions, especially if you wanted to introduce, say, a price on carbon, which, ironically, Keating later wanted to do but couldn't because it would have increased electricity bills. In 1996, new Prime Minister John Howard took no regrets and ran with it, or at least power walked with it.
We mustn't do silly things on climate change, do things that damage our economic advantage.
You went to the 2007 election supporting an ETS. What's so wrong with it now?
Well, the rest of the world's not doing it.
At this point, you're probably wondering what all of this has to do with bushfires.
When you were Prime Minister, you were actually advocating a higher target than what's on the table now.
That commitment was said to apply if every country was bound, if it was, and I quote, applicable to all.
In the 7 years since old mate took office, funding has been stripped from emergency relief organisations, climate research, and every other national public service that could help support firefighting efforts and supply relief for victims. They even took money from the Red Cross. So where's all this money going?
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared.
In Morrison's first year as PM, the federal government gave $29 billion in subsidies to the fossil fuels industry. That's $1,198 per person in Australia per year. But don't worry, the industry gives a little back.
We're here without...
to the politicians, donating millions to 3 out of Australia's 4 major political parties. Although due to a lack of disclosure, experts reckon this figure is probably much, much higher. And the mining industry really gets its money's worth too.
The fire rating danger for parts of central Queensland has now been raised to the highest level in the state's history. Catastrophic in what's being described as an unprecedented bushfire crisis.
Whether it's drought today, whether it's fires today, whether it's floods today, they are occurring while Australia has been meeting the very targets that we've been set for ourselves.
A victory for the controversial Adani coal mine today, with the federal government signing off.
You're arguing that there should be a change. And I think Australians deserve to know what is the cost of the change.
We're all conservationists.
I have always believed in miracles.
For the sake of the next generation, Australia must find a way forward on climate change.
They won't build the mine unless we give them free coal, free water. It doesn't make economic sense.
It's the group at the coalface of Adani's legal battle.
We are driven by a need for justice for our people.
And will continue to be Labor policy to allow the mining of our coal resources.
The politicians have completely sold out to their coal mining donors.
Australia refusing to commit to phasing out coal.
People are stealing water from their friends and neighbours.
It is very tough for a lot of people out here on the land at the moment.
Extreme fire danger. That's unprecedented at this time of year in the state.
Incredible wealth in minerals and coal.
We can do a deal on that.
I want to go. We'll do a deal. We'll make a deal.
We are successfully balancing our environmental and our economic future.
A motion from the Greens and Labor to declare a climate emergency. Government won't be supporting that.
The Australian government has warned it will crack down on activists who threaten the country's lucrative mining industry.
New South Wales is burning and our leadership is doing nothing. In fact, I don't think you can call them leaders.
Mr Albanese wouldn't clarify his stance on regulatory approvals for 5 new mega mines planned for central Queensland, but believes there shouldn't be any government intervention.
Prime Minister Scott Morrison has doubled down on Australia's stance on climate policy and once again ruled out any changes as a result of this unprecedented crisis.
As our national leader, should you have seen some of the warnings that were there and done more?
Well, David, the thing about things that are unprecedented is exactly that. They're unprecedented.
There's a lot more we could do to be prepared and stop these fires if our stupid government would put more funds into important things. But some of these fires, they will burn for months, and we'll be breathing smoke for months.
Regret is a funny thing. It infers that a person, or a political party, didn't understand the consequences of their decisions, so with hindsight they realise they've made the wrong call and adjust accordingly.
The Prime Minister will seek to set up a royal commission into Australia's bushfire crisis in consultation with the states.
But that's not what's happening here.
Firefighters like me have been out asking for action on climate change with other groups for the last 10 years, and here we are. So there's no surprise, but we've got to deal with it.
And all of us have seen conditions change over the years, supercharging the bushfire problem, and it's all down to climate change, the burning of oil, coal and gas.
This is the impact of climate change. And the fact that Australia wasn't prepared for it, it's just the result of a bunch of politicians doing their jobs with no regrets.